As the American flag lowers over the Syrian sands and Tim Cook's reign at Apple reaches its twilight, the world teeters on the knife edge of total war. Washington's bombs or breakthrough. Ultimatum to Iran has the Strait of Hormuz choking in a naval noose, leaving Beijing to seize the mantle of peacemaker while a $50 billion Asian alliance rises from the ashes of a burning Middle East. Stay with Zenith Global News. We track the pulse of a planet in transition. Today's top stories. Decade-long presence ends as Kasrak Air Base falls to Damascus control. A new sovereign reality begins in the Levant. 1,000 ships stranded in a naval minefield as the 14-day ceasefire bleeds out. Islamabad tables remain empty ahead of midnight deadline. Xi Jinping breaks silence. China demands immediate Gulf ceasefire. Race against the Pacific. Search for 6 after cargo ship Mariana capsizes. Power plant day. Trump threatens total destruction if Iran deadline missed. From chips to ships, India and South Korea ink $50 billion strategic pact. Apple's $4 trillion architect steps down. The Turnus era begins. Now, let's dive into the details of today's biggest stories.
U.S. military fully withdraws from Syria after 10 years. 10 years ago, the first boots hit the Syrian sand under the banner of a global crusade. Today, the last wheels cross the Jordanian border, leaving behind a silence that carries more weight than the decade of thunder that preceded it. The Kasrak Air Base, once the nerve center of American influence in the Levant, has been handed over to the Syrian 60th Division. This transition represents the formal end of an era and the beginning of a precarious new sovereign reality. The departure is the final act in a rapid sequence of regime change and restructuring. By integrating former Kurdish fighters into the national army, the new government in Damascus has effectively inherited the infrastructure of its former patrons. For Washington, the withdrawal is a pivot toward a strategy of offshore containment, trading physical territory for regional flexibility. Yet, as the American footprint vanishes, the political vacuum remains under intense scrutiny. The world is observing whether this exit signifies a successful mission or a strategic retreat from the complex rivalries of the Middle East. The borders are closed, the bases are empty, and the responsibility for the region's stability now rests entirely with the hands that remain. Iran War Live updates. Tehran and Trump send mixed signals ahead of potential talks. The horizon over the Strait of Hormuz is no longer defined by the sunrise, but by the steel silhouettes of 1,000 stranded ships. For decades, these waters were the carotid artery of the global machine. Today, that artery has been pinched shut. The seizure of the Tuska was the spark. The blockade of the Persian Gulf is the wildfire. Across the water, the USS Spruance sits in a predatory vigil, enforcing a mandate that seeks to starve an economy into submission. In response, the Revolutionary Guard has turned the world's most vital transit point into a minefield of uncertainty. They call it reciprocal justice. The West calls it an act of war. As the 14-day ceasefire bleeds toward its final hours, the diplomatic tables in Islamabad remain empty. The ultimatum from Washington is absolute: total disarmament or total isolation. The reply from Tehran is equally rigid: no negotiations under the shadow of a naval noose. While the architects of policy debate the price of oil and the reach of missiles, 1,600 crews sit in the heat of the Gulf, waiting to see if the next dawn brings a breakthrough or a barrage. The clock is running out. China's Xi Jinping, in call with Saudi's MBS, says Strait of Hormuz should be opened, calls for immediate ceasefire. The recent diplomatic intervention by Chinese President Xi Jinping, following a high-stakes call with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, marks a decisive entry by Beijing into the escalating Persian Gulf crisis. China's call for an immediate ceasefire and the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz underscores the severe economic vulnerability of the world's largest oil importer to prolonged maritime blockades. For Beijing, the closure of the strait is not a localized military issue, but a direct threat to domestic energy security. By aligning with Riyadh, China is positioning itself as a stability guarantor, attempting to protect the flow of nearly 20% of the world's petroleum and mitigate the surge in global fuel prices. The coordination with Saudi Arabia highlights the deepening China-Saudi partnership. As Riyadh navigates the fallout of the U.S.-Iran confrontation, it increasingly looks toward Beijing to leverage its influence with Tehran to de-escalate the toll and control strategy currently paralyzing Gulf shipping. This intervention signals that China is no longer a passive observer of Middle Eastern geopolitics. Beijing is now actively utilizing its economic leverage to shape the security architecture of the region, emphasizing a multilateral approach to ensure the freedom of navigation in critical international waterways. Search is on for 6 from a ship that overturned near the northern Marianas during a typhoon. Significant humanitarian and logistical crisis in the northern Mariana Islands following the devastation of Super Typhoon Sinlaku. The search for 6 missing crew members from the overturned cargo ship Mariana underscores the extreme dangers of maritime operations during high-intensity weather events, even for modern vessels. The search operation, covering over 99,000 square miles, demonstrates high-level international cooperation between the U.S., Guam, Japan, and New Zealand. The use of HC-130 Hercules aircraft and remote-operated drones reflects a transition toward tech-integrated recovery, yet the primary obstacle remains the vast, unpredictable Pacific environment.
The expedited major disaster declaration requested by the Northern Marianas government emphasizes the island's dependence on external aid and FEMA support. The loss of potable water and electricity on Saipan illustrates how a Category 4 storm can instantaneously dismantle local utilities, necessitating a long-term shift toward more resilient, decentralized power and water systems. The Mariana was a vital link for freight between Guam, Tinian, and Saipan. Its loss, coupled with the storm's destruction of public infrastructure, threatens to choke regional supply chains, likely leading to shortages of essential goods like drinking water in the coming weeks.
Trump's ultimatum: lots of bombs to fall on Iran if Wednesday deadline missed. The rhetoric emerging from the White House regarding the Wednesday deadline marks the most severe escalation in the Maximum Pressure 2.0 campaign. By framing the ultimatum in explicitly kinetic terms, threatening a massive aerial campaign, the administration is attempting to break the current diplomatic deadlock through sheer coercive force. The administration's core demand remains a comprehensive treaty that goes beyond nuclear restrictions to include total ballistic missile dismantlement and the cessation of regional proxy funding. The threat of lots of bombs is designed to convince Tehran that the cost of defiance now exceeds the cost of total concession. With the Strait of Hormuz effectively closed, the U.S. is signaling that it will no longer rely solely on naval interdiction. The ultimatum suggests a shift toward targeting the IRGC's internal infrastructure and command centers to force a reopening of the global energy artery. Despite the threat, the diplomatic channel in Islamabad remains the only off-ramp. While Iranian state media claims no plans for participation, the U.S. delegation, led by Vice President Vance, remains positioned for a breakthrough. This threat-plus-table approach aims to capitalize on Iran's internal economic strain, recently exacerbated by the total naval blockade. The next 24 hours represent a critical window. The international community, led by calls for restraint from Beijing and Riyadh, is watching to see if this ultimatum is a final push for a grand bargain or the definitive trigger for a direct conventional conflict. India and South Korea plan $50 billion trade push with new deals. The April 20, 2026 state visit of South Korean President Lee Jae-myung to India marks a definitive pivot to the east as both nations seek to insulate their economies from the ongoing volatility in West Asia. The centerpiece of this visit is a roadmap to nearly double bilateral trade from $27 billion to $50 billion by 2030, transforming the relationship into a special strategic partnership. A joint declaration was issued to fast-track the upgrade of the 2010 Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. India is prioritizing a rebalance of the current $12.8 billion trade deficit, pushing for greater market access and stricter rules of origin to prevent third-party dumping. Amid the U.S.-Iran naval blockade and the resulting fuel crisis, both nations emphasized cooperation in economic security. This includes stabilizing supply chains for critical commodities like naphtha and fostering a digital bridge for semiconductors, AI, and green energy. For India, the South Korean partnership offers a vital alternative to Middle Eastern energy dependence and a strategic counterweight in the Indo-Pacific. By focusing on chips to ships, Both democracies are signaling a collective move toward technological sovereignty and regional stability, positioning the relationship as a cornerstone for the next decade of Asian economic growth. Tim Cook to step down as Apple CEO, with John Ternus tapped as successor. Tim Cook will step down as Apple's CEO, marks the conclusion of one of the most financially successful tenures in corporate history. Effective September 1, 2026, John Ternus, the current Senior Vice President of Hardware Engineering, will assume the role, while Cook transitions to Executive Chairman of the board. The shift mirrors the 2011 transition from Steve Jobs to Tim Cook, creating a dual leadership model. Ternus will handle product execution and engineering, while Cook remains a global diplomat, focusing on policy engagement and external relations. Ternus inherits a company at a technological crossroads. While Apple's market cap grew from $350 billion to over $4 trillion under Cook, the Ternus era must immediately address the L gap. With competitors like NVIDIA and Meta leading in generative AI, Ternus's immediate mandate is the successful integration of Gemini-powered AI into the iPhone ecosystem and the launch of new categories like foldable devices and AI-powered wearables. This clinical execution of a long-term succession plan ensures stability during a period of intense global volatility and shifting technological cycles.
If you value real, balanced reporting from across the globe, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Turn on notifications so you never miss the stories that matter. Stay informed, stay aware, stay ahead. Only on Zenith Global News.